All right, folks, welcome. Today is Wednesday, April 28th. Today's lesson will take us through the next 22 minutes. It'll be a quick one. Many of these topics that we will discuss today, I think, will be of interest to you just because they are a little intriguing, because you can actually see some of these relationships that we will discuss taking place probably right outside of your windows. And definitely as you make your way to school, you'll see some of these relationships outside of your car windows. That being said, I just want to provide another reminder that tomorrow is Thursday and will be our last day discussing new material. Friday will be our Unit 9 exam. So we are obviously going to be done with school a little bit early today. It could be a good idea to use your extra time to go over your notes to make sure you're getting your assignments done. There are no new assignments today because I don't like to assign anything on the shortened Wednesdays. We will have one more asynchronous assignment and one more warm-up and one more exit ticket that I will need you all to do before Friday. So please make sure that you are staying up to date with the tasks at hand. That being said, today's lesson is about ecological relationships. It's the 5th day of our 9th unit. And the objective is to explain various ways organisms interact with each other and with their environments, resulting in stability within ecosystems. Previously, we have discussed some of the things that can cause disruptions to ecosystems, including human activities over the last 250 years or so. Today, we're going to talk about the natural order. We're going to talk about relationships that have existed for thousands and in some cases millions of years that allow organisms to communicate with one another and to exist because of one another. The essential question today is, how do organisms communicate with one another to benefit their own populations? So this is a great time to make sure that you've got everything you need to take some strong, effective, and efficient and copious notes today. Just because you are at home and I cannot see you does not mean that you are taking the day off from note taking. I'm going to stay on this slide for a little bit longer while I update my attendance. Ashley, Paris, Araceli, Abina, Dijon, and Sayana. Janelle, Lisa, Melissa, and Abigail. We got a lot of birthdays coming up. Josue and Tayshawn. All right. So biotic factors interact with each other in their environments in two ways: symbiotic relationships and feeding relationships. Symbiotic relationships are any type of close long-term interaction between two biological organisms of different species. That's important. So we're not talking about intraspecial relationships today. These are interspecies relationships, which means two different species are involved. Feeding relationships are interactions in which organisms gain energy by eating other organisms. And again, different species here. There are cannibals that exist in nature. There are cannibalistic organisms. Roaches and rodents have been known to be cannibalistic in dire situations. Even some larger mammals have been cannibalistic in dire situations when there is no other food present. But these feeding relationships that we will discuss today characterize primarily organisms that are eating other species. Okay. So this image at first glance probably looks a bit confusing, but it's really not. So we'll break it down. We've got species A and species B, two different species. Species A can benefit. It can have no positive or negative effect, or it can be harmed in its relationships with species B. And same thing with species B. Species B can benefit from its relationship with species A. It might not have any negative or positive relationship with species A, or it could be harmed by its relationships with species A. If both species are benefiting, that's called mutualism, and we will discuss that a little bit more in depth. If one species benefits while the other is not experiencing any positive or negative effect, that's called commensalism, and we will also discuss that. And then if one species is benefiting and the other species is being harmed, that's called parasitism. We'll discuss that. There are three other types of symbiotic relationships: neutralism, mensalism, and competition. And I'll talk briefly about those, but they are unlikely to be discussed on your EOC, and they won't come up on the Unit 9 exam this Friday. So the first one we'll talk about is mutualism, in which both species benefit from their interactions with one another. So there's your definition. Make sure you get that copied down, the definition of mutualism. In the meantime, I'll discuss these examples that we have images of on the screen. So in that first image, we see a red-billed oxpecker. That's the mammal with the ornate antlers on its head. And if you look closely, you can see not just one, but what appears to be four different. No, I'm sorry, the oxpeckers are the birds. The red-billed oxpeckers are the birds. That's an impala with the antlers on its head. So if you look closely, you can see at least four different red-billed oxpeckers that are riding on the back and on the neck and on the underbelly of this impala. This is an example of what's called a service-resource relationship, in which one organism is providing a service to the other and is getting a resource in exchange for that service. So in this case, both organisms are benefiting. The impala is benefiting because its coat is being cleaned by the oxpecker. The oxpeckers are eating ticks and fleas and other pests that are living in the coat of the impala. And so this provides a direct benefit to the impala because those microorganisms can sometimes carry disease, or they are just a nuisance, lead to specific rashes and other things. And the resource that the oxpeckers get in return is that they get the food. They get to eat those pests. So it's mutualism. Both organisms are benefiting. In a service-service relationship, both organisms provide a service to one another. That service could be protection, it could be housing, it could be some type of alert system. The example we have here, we see a clownfish, which you all probably recognize if you've ever seen the movie Finding Nemo, living amongst a sea anemone. The clownfish is driving off butterfly fish, which feed on sea anemones. So the presence of the clownfish is a deterrent to the anemone's predator. And the service that the anemone provides is housing. It gives the clownfish somewhere to live. It provides shelter. So both of these are examples of mutualism. There are examples of resource-resource relationships as well. These are more rare. They take place primarily with fungi, in which one fungi might provide a carbohydrate to another, and in exchange it gets some type of nitrogenous compound, gets some nitrogen. So it's definitely more rare and harder to come across, but service resource and service are more common. Commensalism is when one species benefits and the other species has neither a positive nor negative impact. It's neither significantly harmed nor helped. So there are different types of commensalism as well. On the left, we have what's called foracy. And foracy is when one animal is attached to another exclusively for transport purposes. So if you look closely at this image on your screen, you can see a colony of mites that are riding on the body of this fly. And this provides some transportation. So it's pretty interesting stuff. Obviously, both very small organisms. And then there's what's called equalism, in which one species uses another for permanent housing. So one good example is an orchid that is literally embedded in the trunk of a tree and grows on that tree. We can think of bird species that live in the holes of some trees. So this is not harmful to the tree. The tree's not the tree's trunk is not damaged to the point at which the tree might die. But of course, it provides a direct benefit to the orchid or to the bird that is living inside of the tree. And then there's parasitism, in which one organism called the parasite benefits, while the other organism, which is called the host, is harmed. Believe it or not, approximately 40% of all animal species are parasites. In some ways, parasitism is a type of predator-prey relationship, but the difference is that these parasites typically do not kill their hosts. They just they feed off of parts of them. So there are ectoparasites that live on the surface of the host's body. We could think about lice that live in human hair. They make your scalp itchy, but they're feeding really on your hair. There are endoparasites, which live within the host's body, like a tapeworm that lives in the digestive system of an organism. These parasites are typically sucking up the nutrients that should be absorbed by a person's or an organism's digestive tract. The picture here appears to be the large intestine of some organism. The large intestine is a site where many of our lipids are broken down so that some of their compounds can be absorbed by our bodies and repurposed. And they are also a site of water absorption. So these parasites often lead to severe dehydration because they're essentially drinking the water that is really supposed to be being absorbed by the host's body. And then there are micro predators, which do not actually live inside or on the host, but they visit their hosts intermittently. We can think about a classic example being mosquitoes. The problem with these is that they obviously can transfer disease as they visit, and they also oftentimes, if we have a lot of bloodletting organisms, a lot of these micro predators that are taking blood out of their host, that host can eventually become anemic. This typically wouldn't happen to a large mammal, but for a smaller mammal, this is much more much more likely. Okay. So then there are those three others. Again, I'll just go quickly through them. Neutralism is when neither species is benefited or harmed.
Excuse me?
Yes.
Can you go back just for like 2 seconds?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, I'm ready.
Excellent. Thank you, Paris. All right. So neutralism, nothing to write down here, is almost impossible to prove because most relationships do benefit or harm at least one of the participating species. So we have very few examples of this actually taking place in nature. Mensalism is when one species experiences no positive or negative effect where the other species is actually harmed. So we've got to remember that grass is a living organism. And so, especially in herding colonies or herding populations that have large migratory patterns that are moving over large plots of land throughout the year, of course, they do not suffer any damage. Their hooves and legs are perfectly fine walking over this land, but the grass itself is actually killed or severely damaged as a result of these large populations walking over it. So that's mensalism. One species harmed, the other is not. And then competition, of course, competition provides a harm to both organisms, both species, because they have fewer opportunities to find prey, to find their food resources. Okay. In addition to symbiotic relationships, there are also feeding relationships. There's predation, in which one organism, called the predator, kills and eats another organism called the prey. Predation does not always need to be a large organism like a big cat or a bear. Predation can also exemplify an herbivore, a small animal that is eating plants. It just literally is defined as one organism that has to kill and eat another organism. That other organism might be a plant. It might be an insect. It might be a fungus. Okay. Won't watch the videos this time. I'll talk about that later. Then there's scavenging. I'm sure you've heard of this as well. One organism eats a dead organism, and that organism has died not from being killed by the organism that's eating it. It may have been killed by another organism which only ate some parts and left some scraps, or it may have died by natural causes, or it could have died from infection. And so typically these scavenging organisms have really advanced immune systems as well as really adaptive digestive systems such that they do not get easily infected, because eating a dead organism can introduce you to all types of bacteria. So scavenging organisms need to have protection against the potential sickness. So we've learned over time that their immune systems are quite strong and that they have very acidic digestive systems that can kill off a lot of types of bacteria. We've got one more minute.
It looks like he's quite badly injured.
So yeah, nothing to write down here, so I'll go back to the other slide in a minute. if you need to finish writing it. But these are the different words that describe feeding relationships: carnivores, herbivores, frugivores, which is a new word to me. Maybe you've heard of it, but a frugivore eats mainly fruits, roots, nuts, and seeds. So of course there are examples of that. It's different than an herbivore because herbivores typically eat foliage. They don't eat the fruits of the plants. They eat kind of the green stuff. And marine animals are often, especially large marine animals, are often considered herbivores too, because they eat large amounts of algae or plankton, which are also photosynthetic. They do photosynthesis. So in many ways, they are the plant species of the sea. And then omnivores, which eat a large variety of all food sources, and decomposers, which are an extremely important part of any ecosystem. And we'll talk more about decomposers tomorrow, but they return organic matter back to the soil. So they break down dead and decaying matter, and they extract specific chemical compounds and nutrients. And in some ways, they return those to the soil where new species and new organisms can sprout out. All right, so it's now 10:30, so class is actually over. If you need to continue writing this, or if you need me to go back to any other definitions, just let me know. But I appreciate you all being here today, and I will talk to you tomorrow in person. Thank you, Melissa. See you, Abigail. See you, John.